The Miyoo Mini V1s have a sticky button issue. How serious is it? Can you fix it? Well, let's take a look at my V1 and see how serious the problem is. Now, the best way I could replicate this is by holding down the B button and then moving over to the A button. It would click. Well, let's take a deeper look and see if we can fix it. Now, there are a couple widespread issues notably with the V1s. The first would be this D-pad. As you can see, it does work, but it does stick a little bit. You can see some of the plastic actually rubbing out near the center part here. Now, the other serious issue would be with the buttons themselves. As you saw before, they do stick a little bit when you push in. Now, if you're transitioning from a button, so if you're holding down B and then you transition to an A, but you haven't fully lifted it up, you will notice it a little bit more. Now, compared to the control buttons themselves, the D-pad isn't actually too bad, at least on my unit, but each model has slight variances. Most notably on my unit, I'm noticing it most with the A and the B buttons. So first things first, let's take out the 4 screws on the back and take out the battery. Now, another thing that you can do first is just take out the battery. It makes it a lot easier, and then you can get to the screws underneath. Once you get the battery out, there's 2 more screws that you need to remove to pull off the back case. Once you've loosened all the screws, you don't actually have to pull them out, just lift up the back and the whole thing will come right up. Now that we have access to the motherboard, we can first look at removing the ribbon cable. Now, if you've watched my speaker upgrade video, you know that there's a little trick to getting this ribbon cable up here safely. First, just use something small and lift up the plastic piece. Once the plastic is removed from the lock, use your fingernail to disengage it, and then use the tape to pull up the ribbon cable. Now, before removing the motherboard itself, you should always remove your microSD card just in case you don't want to damage it. Now, I found the easiest way to get this up is to hold the power button up here and the Type-C at the bottom and just pull it up from the side. And with the motherboard out of the way, we now have access to the buttons. We can try to fix those. Let's pull off the membranes, we can access the buttons. Now, once the membranes are off, you might notice a little bit of plastic that's coming off around the edge of the buttons. It's a little hard to see, but let's zoom in. So you can see a little bit on the left side of my red button here, and a little bit on the bottom left side of my blue button. Now, the 2 control buttons here look completely fine. The red one though has a little bit of plastic that's been wearing off on the left side, as you can see, and there's a little bit on the X button as well. Let's flip it over and remove the buttons next. Now for this next part, I'm going to be using a fine metal file. I find it gives it a really soft edge. You can also use a small piece of sandpaper with a very fine grit on it, but this is all I have at the moment, so let's try this and see how this works. Now, once you actually get the buttons out, you'll notice that some of the other buttons might have been rubbing too. My X button actually had a little bit of plastic on the edge that was coming off, so let's give it a quick little sand and see if we can get that edge off. Now, unfortunately, it's not the easiest thing to show on camera at this angle, but at the very beginning you did kind of see how the plastic looked when it was wearing off. And with the D-pad out as well, you can see where the plastic's been rubbing here in the middle. Unfortunately, there's not much we can do about that. Next, let's take one of the most problematic buttons and see if we can fix that edge on there. Be very careful when sanding this that you don't actually take some of the shiny part off the button, especially near the top where it's visible. You just want to basically go at maybe a 15 or 20 degree angle and try to sand that edge down. Now, because the plastic is very soft, this probably will only take 1 or 2 runs down here and it should be fine. Now to double check your work, put the buttons back in and check to see if there's any edges that have been rubbing that are still there. If you see anything like on the red button here, you'll have to go back in and sand that edge off again. Now with our edges sanded off around our problematic buttons, let's put our V1 back together and see how well it works. Now unfortunately, a replacement set of buttons, even from a V2 unit put into V1, does not fix the issue. Both the V1 and the V2 buttons are the same size, so even if you grabbed a set from a V2 and put them in here, you'd have the same problem. Now the entire issue with the V1s themselves is not actually the buttons, but it's just this hole around the buttons themselves. Now on the V2 model, even though the buttons are the same size, the hole's been made a little bit bigger, so you won't have to pull this apart to do this on your V2s. So once you put the buttons back in there and the membrane on the back, drop the D-pad in, and you can see how tight that D-pad is as well, and that's why that's rubbing. And with the D-pad and the membranes both on the buttons, we can go ahead and put the motherboard back in next. When putting the motherboard back in, make sure to slot the volume rocker in first before putting the board down. Now don't push the board down the whole way, just make sure the button up here is not stuck under the board before you push it down or you will snap the switch off. And with the motherboard back in, we can go ahead and put the ribbon cable back in now. Just grab the ribbon cable from the tape here, pull it up a little bit to pull it out, and then line it up and push it in. Once the ribbon cable's in, just make sure to push the lock down before you put the tape back down over top of it. When that's done, grab the back panel and put that on. Now with the back panel on, all we have to do is put the 6 screws back in and the battery. Next, all you have to do is plug in the micro SD card and the battery and you're good to go. And with that, you've reassembled your Miyoo Mini and fixed the buttons. Let's take a look at those. Now with the edges of the bottom sanded off a little bit, you can see the buttons are a lot easier to push in, especially the A and the B button. Those were our two problematic buttons before. Now let's also try holding down the B button and pressing the A button. That would cause the button to stick last time. As you can see, it's not happening anymore, so we fixed the button issue. Now I suppose you could take some sandpaper around the inside of this D-pad and try to fix that. My unit's not too bad, so I'm going to leave mine. Hopefully that fixed your buttons. Thanks for watching.